Among the flurry of executive orders President Trump signed on his first day in office is one order asking for proposals to beautify federal civic architecture. How does architecture influence how Americans think about their government institutions? To discuss the implications of this order, I spoke with architectural designer and architecture thought leader Samuel Ben-Hersha. Samuel Ben-Hersha, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Hi, Jake. How are you doing?
Now, President Trump just issued an executive order on day one in office to beautify federal civic architecture. As an architectural designer, what's the effect that a building design has on psychology and our use of the space?
Right. So building design generally influences human psychology and the way we interact with spaces. Classical architecture with its symmetry, architectural order, and ornamentation with certain primary guiding principles like golden ratio, Vitruvian principles, and all those stuff, evokes the feeling of stability, harmony, and grandeur. Aligning well with the purpose of government buildings, actually. Spaces designed with classical elements tends to instill a sense of trust and respect. The materials, lighting, and spatial arrangements influence how welcoming or authoritative a building could actually feel like. For federal civic architecture, a balanced and intentional design can actually foster pride in public institutions and create spaces where people feel both empowered and respected.
In Trump's order, it says to, quote, respect regional, traditional, and classical architectural heritage. What would this look like in terms for our nation's capital in D.C.?
Right. The article also states recommendations shall consider procedures for incorporating community input into federal building design selections, which is important to consider that a design should have flexibility to speak more locally and have connection with people, which eventually enhances the local urban fabric. In practice, this would also mean emphasizing the classical styles such as neoclassical, federal, and Beaux-Arts, all these architectural traditions that used to dominate and still dominating the Washington, D.C. We would see some prominent features that highlights the city with classical architectural elements like the columns, domes, pediments, as seen in the U.S. Capitol or the Supreme Court building. There are some usage of highly durable, historical, significant materials like the sandstone, marble, limestone, and granite, and designing of these buildings that integrate regional aesthetics, like using the locally sourced materials or referencing local historical styles, actually. In DC, this could manifest in restoring and expanding the current classical skyline, which resisting the trends that veer towards stark minimalism or overly futuristic designs.
Right. DC is inspired by ancient Greece and Rome, the pillars on the buildings. What's the significance of having this historical heritage?
Architecture forms the visual language, right, through which a nation expresses its values. In US, many government buildings in Washington, D.C. were modeled after ancient Greek and Roman styles, reflecting the ideals of democracy, law, and order that these ancient civilizations actually championed it. For example, we have the Greek architecture showcasing columns in the Supreme Court, which symbolizes the democracy and civic participation. And then the Roman architecture influenced the domes in the US Capitol represents the strength and governance, basically. By synthesizing these forms, I think early American architects aim to visually communicate the enduring principles of freedom and justice to citizens and visitors alike. The influence remains a cornerstone of the nation's identity, providing a tangible connection to the foundation of democratic governance.
Now, the executive order here is partly in response to what's called a brutalist style of architecture, which is often associated with the Soviet Union. It began under the socialist movement in UK. How did this come to be used in federal buildings now?
Right. So brutalism, characterized by raw concrete, blocky forms, and utilitarian aesthetics, emerged in the mid-20th century. While it originated in the UK's socialist movement, it was adopted in the US during the post-war period for its cost effectiveness, durability, and functional focus. In federal architecture, to be honest, brutalism gained traction as modern, forward-looking style in the mid-1950s, 70s buildings, like the Edgar Hoover FBI building. However, its stark and imposing aesthetic drew criticism for being unwelcoming and authoritarian as well, creating a disconnect between the public and government buildings. This negative perception could have fueled discussion about reviving, classical architecture as a way to restore approachability and pride in civic spaces. The other example that I could state is I'm currently living in San Francisco. The San Francisco Federal Building, which is more contemporary, versus the San Francisco Civic Center, which is more classical. We know how the Civic Center really integrates its design element into the urban circulation for people to engage with the building. People generally feel welcomed at all times of the day when it comes to Civic Center, whereas people feel a little bit isolated or secluded from the San Francisco Federal Building.
Right. So we certainly have a lot to look forward to. Samuel Ben Hersha, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Absolutely. You have a good one.